So Professor Bandyopadhyay doesn't really need an introduction, at least in our country. She is serving as the director of Indian Statistical Institute for the second term now, and her primary work area is computer science and applied bioinformatics, and she has hundreds of papers to her name, and she has won all important prizes of India and abroad as well. She is awardee of Infosys Prize, Bhatnagar Prize, and JC Bose Fellowship, and from Germany, Humboldt Fellowship and ICTP Associateship. She's an IEEE Fellow as well. She is the fellow of all important, Indian academies, right? And quite a prolific scientist. And, she has made a transition from computer science to a lot of applied biological science research as well. So it's extremely relevant for the computational biology department of IIIT and the kind of audience that we have. And also worth mentioning that she is my de facto primary supervisor, and I learned a lot of things from her and still learning. And over to you, ma'am. I don't want to waste more time. Thank you.
Please unmute, madam.
Yeah.
Now
is my screen visible? Like it's in.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. The screen is visible. You can. Yeah, it's full screen.
And it is. It is. Oh, it is not. Hold on. It's going up and down.
Yeah. It's going up and down as well. Yeah.
So thank you very much, Debarko, for the introduction, and thank you, Professor Raghav, for inviting me to this Health Informatics Summit, which you are organizing. Very timely topic, and I think a lot of work is getting done in India in this area. Indeed, I was fortunate to have Debarko as my student. We co-supervised, Professor Maulik and myself, we co-supervised Debarko, and I'm really proud to see that he's doing very well, and among the top students that we have supervised, Debarko comes very near the top of that list. So I wish him all the very best, and thanks again, Debarko, for the introduction. I am, as has been pointed out, I'm a computer scientist, and although I have been working for several years now in applications to biology, I must admit that I have always struggled with biology. In my school days, it was like a terror to me because I found it very difficult to remember the various things which I had to, I understood that I had to memorize a lot of things in biology, which I was very bad at. And therefore, in my school days, whenever I had these biology examinations, every time, it was invariably, every time my examination would be quite bad. And I would come back and reassure my mother that next time the biology exam would be better. The marks would be very average sort of things, but that was, it never became better. So the first opportunity I got of leaving biology, I left it. And very fortunately, I must say, because I was studying for physics. After my 12th, I went into a BSc physics, which was a subject I really admired, I really liked. But then after my bachelor's degree, fortunately, I moved into computer science, and then I stayed on in computer science, and I found it very engaging, very nice, very interesting, primarily because there was very little that I had to memorize. Computer science is a very logical subject, and things follow from one step to the other. And therefore, I found it very comfortable. But then when I was into my research, completed my PhD, became a faculty member, and then started taking students of my own, then I got a student who encouraged me to get into biology, because the work that I was doing for my PhD and post-PhD work, which was essentially in pattern recognition, which in a different terminology these days are called, has become a part of data mining, or whatever you want to say. But essentially, we have been doing that for many, many years now, more than 2 decades. I mean, from 1990s, we've been working in pattern recognition, and today it's called data mining and other terminology. So that student got me interested because there were a lot of problems of pattern recognition, which appeared in biology. And therefore the methods, because I was essentially developing methods. As a computer scientist, I take pleasure in developing methods which will beat other methods of computer science, of let's say classification, feature selection, clustering. So we were always developing methods, also optimization, because I specialized in optimization techniques. In particular, I've been working quite a bit in multi-objective optimization, which you might have heard a little while ago. So once I got into biology, then I realized that indeed there were a lot of problems of biological data analytics, which required sophisticated methods, improved methods, because the better the methods are, the better output, the better biological insights you would gain, and hopefully it would be more useful to the community. So that is how I got into biology. And then, of course, a little while later, Debarko also joined me. And I remain grateful to these earlier students of mine who got me into biology and computational biology, because they taught me quite a bit of biology. In fact, microRNA was taught by one of the students. And in fact, even before that, the basic biology was taught to me by my students. And I, as a very poor student, I would one day learn, next day I would forget. I would go back to my students to ask them to re-explain to me what they had taught me the day before. And that way it went on, and it took quite a bit of time for me to even remember the basic terms and what happens where. But the good thing is, because of the internet and because of the different videos which are there, it has become relatively simple to learn at least the basic tricks, the basic, what should I say, the philosophy, or the different processes which are happening, because nowadays you can watch videos. So that is how I learned. I do not claim myself to be a biologist. I'm a very poor biologist, but I mean, not at all a biologist, a computer science, trying to learn and do a little bit of biology. So with that, let me come to my talk. And as has been pointed out, I have been at the Indian Statistical Institute for a long time now, which I have had the good fortune to lead for the last several years. This institute, although the name implies that it certainly is very good and is one of the topmost institutes in India in statistics, but besides statistics, we do a lot more. In fact, I myself am from computer science. We have a very strong mathematics department in ISI, and we have also other departments, very strong department of economics. We have biological sciences, physics and earth sciences, and we teach different degree and diploma programs, including 2 undergraduate degrees in statistics and mathematics. There are 8 master's level degrees, including in computer science. In fact, the first computer in India was got in Indian Statistical Institute. It was the first computer that came to India. The founder of Indian Statistical Institute, Prashanta Chandra Mahalanobis, had the vision, what should I say, he was a pioneer and realized the importance of computers in whatever we do. Even he realized that even for statistical analysis, one cannot do without computers anymore. So he and Bhabha, they were trying to get computers to their respective institutes. And it so happened that the first computer in India came to the Indian Statistical Institute. Also, Indian Statistical Institute and Jadavpur University collaborated to build the first indigenously built computer, which was called, because of the 2 institutes, ISI and JU, Jadavpur University, it was called ECJU. So this is an interesting piece of history that we have become party to. Now, I am sure this audience knows quite a bit about central dogma of molecular biology, and it must have been discussed during these few days of deliberations. But just very quickly, for the sake of completeness, we know that we have the genetic material, the DNA, which is if you look at it like a long string, it is a string of ATCGs. And there are certain portions of this DNA which are important in the sense that they code for different proteins. And these portions of the DNA which code for proteins are typically called genes. Of course, in the other non-protein coding gene portions of the DNA, there is also very many important information which has been discovered and is still being discovered. So originally it is thought that this entire billion-long string of DNA, most of it is junk, because only a little portion actually has information in the form of protein coding genes, and the remaining huge portion is essentially junk. But gradually it is being discovered that that is not really junk. There are important information there. We have still not been able to understand the entire DNA, what each portion is doing, because it is a continuous process of discovery. And maybe one day we will understand what each and every portion of this DNA is doing. But it is also important to understand that very little in nature is there which has no purpose. There must be a purpose even in the junk. Even if it is junk, there must be a purpose. And I have my own theories why this junk may be also important. Anyhow, so the gene, it through a process of transcription creates the messenger RNA, which is sort of like the genetic, you can see it is, if you look at this string and if you look at this string, it is only the T's have been replaced by U's. This is of course a biomolecule, a base, it is called a base. T has been replaced by U's. That is all that happens in this, in this string-like messenger RNA. And through another process of translation, from the messenger RNA, we get the protein. So, and proteins are essentially operating in every biochemical process. Anything that you can think of, there are one or more proteins which are involved. And also in different diseases, therefore, there are one or more proteins which have gone rogue, I must say. Something has happened to that protein because of which the disease is manifesting itself. So you can actually figure out that when we take drugs, when we take medicines, most of these medicines, most of them are actually targeting one or the other protein in the cells. And these proteins are not the proteins like when we take meat or something, eggs, the proteins that we ingest, we are not talking of such proteins. We are talking of proteins which is created endogenously, meaning it is born inside the cell. So these proteins, they are involved in various activities inside the cell, and somehow because of a mutation or something, some changes have happened because of which certain proteins have started misbehaving, not doing what they are supposed to do. And because of that, a disease happens, and therefore often small molecules, which are medicines, which are the drugs, are designed, which go and sit with the protein target. And that is how most of the drugs, they behave, they act. And you can also see the protein, I think it is called the protein atlas or something, which does give some idea about the druggable proteins. Okay, so meaning the typical targets, you know, FDA in the US, they give the, what should I say, approval for different drugs. And there is a list of what these approved drugs target. And most of them are proteins, and a list is available, and you can just have a look at the protein, I think protein atlas it is called. So now with that very basic introduction to Debarko, I would request you to give me a heads up about 5 minutes before I'm supposed to end. So now with that very brief introduction to how from the gene we get the messenger RNA and the messenger RNA to the protein, let me now get into microRNAs, because what I will discuss in this talk are different algorithms which we have developed for microRNA data analytics of microRNA data. So what are microRNAs? That is important to understand. And what do these microRNAs do? MicroRNAs, as the name implies, these are RNA molecules, but micro, meaning they are small in size, about 21 to 23 nucleotides long. So it is essentially an RNA molecule, AUCG. These 4 characters will make up the microRNA, but these are short microRNAs. These are short in length. And essentially what they do is when other genes, other genes which are creating proteins, these genes, when they are transcribed, if you remember the transcription process, it creates the messenger RNA from the gene. Okay, so gene to messenger RNA, that transformation is called transcription. Now, when a normal gene has been transcribed to a messenger RNA, then this microRNA goes and attacks the messenger RNA post-transcription. So that is why it is called, it's a post-transcriptional modification that this microRNA actually brings about. And what it does, I'll show you in the next slide. It either degrades, it breaks down the messenger RNA, the one that it is targeting, or it goes and sits with the messenger RNA, thereby repressing the activity of the messenger RNA. And what was the activity of the messenger RNA? What would it have done? It would have normally produced a protein. But because this microRNA, before the protein production happens, this microRNA goes and sits with the messenger RNA. So this messenger RNA is unable to produce its protein. So essentially, whether it goes by mRNA degradation or by translational repression, the end result is that the normal protein which was supposed to be produced does not get produced because the microRNA has come in the way. Now, it has been seen that microRNA plays significant but very, fine-tuning roles in many, many biological processes. And they add to a level of gene regulation. Now, this is important. What is gene regulation? As you might all be knowing, that genes regulate each other. How? Because if you look at the genome from any cell of the body, you will find it to be that genome to be exactly the same. That is, the stretch of the long string of ATCGs would be exactly the same wherever you take that genome from. Okay. Then the question is, why do the cells then behave differently? A cell which is part of my fingers will behave differently. It will sort of try to elongate the organ. Okay. But for example, the cell which makes up the tissues which make up my heart will have a different behavior. Another which makes up my liver will have a different behavior, etc. Okay. So the behaviors are different because the proteins which are expressed, because the genes which are expressed in the different cells are different. And why should the genes become different? Because each gene has a switching mechanism. Okay. Just like switches in the room, lights in the room, we have, for each light, we have a switch. Similarly, for each gene, there is a switching mechanism. And this gene may be switched on or switched off based on certain other molecules, which again are mostly proteins. So if these proteins come and switch on the gene, then the gene expresses itself and produces its messenger RNA and the protein. But if the switched proteins do not come, are not there, they do not switch on the gene, then the gene remains silent, although in the string it is there physically, but it does not act, it does not function. So that is how the switches act. And I said the switches themselves are proteins. That means these switches themselves, they will be created from some other genes in that same genome. So essentially there is a gene regulatory network, and these protein switches, which are created from some genes, these are called transcription factors. So these transcription factors are responsible for switching on or switching off the genes. And these transcription factors themselves, being proteins, come from some genes. So effectively, this gene is regulating this gene may be regulating some other gene. So there is a complex gene regulatory network whose analysis is by itself a separate area of research. So these genes, they regulate each other, but the microRNA, when it was discovered and scientists started understanding what these microRNAs are doing, then they understood that microRNAs, they add another level of gene regulation, but at a final level, not at the gross level, but at a very fine level. It adds to the regulation of different genes. And microRNAs have been found to be implicated in many different diseases, including almost all types of cancers. So this is how the microRNA works. So what happens is, you see there is a normal protein coding gene, which by itself through transcription would have produced a messenger RNA. This messenger RNA would have come out of the nucleus. This is the nuclear boundary, let's say. It would have come out of the nucleus and would have normally produced a protein through translation. But at some point of time, the microRNA gene, which is also there in that same genome, this is the long genome you can see here. Okay, so this microRNA gene becomes active. And what happens is, you see, an RNA molecule gets produced, which is much longer than the short microRNA. That is the final product. A primary microRNA gets produced. It gets cut from this microRNA gene, and it produces a typical hairpin loop structure. You can see here. Then there is, inside the nucleus only, there is an enzyme called DROSHA, which cuts this primary microRNA at this side. So at this side, end, okay? So this goes away, this goes away. So what you are left with is called the pre-microRNA. Pre-microRNA, which is just this hairpin loop and two arms, okay? One arm is slightly longer than the other arm. Then this pre-microRNA comes out, and there's another enzyme outside the nucleus, but inside the cell, which is called dicer, which you see cuts it at this end also, okay? This hairpin loop is gone. So essentially then what do you have? You have, you know, these two arms, which is the mature microRNA, and it actually makes a complex with a protein, which is called agoproteins. So these proteins and the microRNA, they make a complex called RISC, because it is actually a complex which will silence some other messenger RNA. It is called RNA-induced silencing complex, RISC. It's a protein and microRNA complex, which will go and interfere with this messenger RNA which was produced. It will either directly degrade it, means cut it somewhere, or it will repress, meaning it will go and bind itself to this messenger RNA and sit there. So it doesn't destroy the messenger RNA, but inhibits its functionality. But effect is the same, that this protein does not get produced, okay? And it might so happen, let's take an example of cancer. This particular, let's say this particular gene was producing a protein which was responsible for cell killing. You see, this is called apoptosis. Cells divide and cells also need to be killed. That is a normal process of the body, okay? Now what happens is, let's assume that this protein was responsible for killing, for apoptosis. It was an apoptotic protein, meaning its responsibility was to kill other cells, right? And that is normal, that is required for the body. Now this microRNA becomes active and goes and sits with this mRNA or destroys it, but effect is the same, that this apoptotic protein does not get produced, okay? So what is happening? Cells are dividing normally, but the protein which was responsible for killing cells is not getting produced anymore. And therefore, cells are dividing, nobody is killing it. So there is a mass of cells which are getting produced. And as you know, such explosion of cells is essentially cancer, okay? So this is one way in which a microRNA may be responsible for this particular disease called cancer. There are other ways in which microRNAs can cause cancer, can cause many other diseases. And in fact, it has been found that microRNAs are very heavily implicated not only in cancer, but in many other diseases. This gives some microRNA statistics of 2018, not updated much. And this is something I did with one of my students, very early students who got me into microRNA research actually. And you can see here, this is a microRNA cancer network. This was published in BMC Silence. Unfortunately, this journal has been discontinued, but this paper continues to get a lot of citations. So you can see here, this was a holistic look at which microRNAs were involved with which cancer types. And this holistic picture actually gave us an idea which microRNAs are like hub microRNAs, which are affecting a lot of different cancer types, which cancers are being affected by a lot of microRNAs, and so on and so forth. and also how, whether through upregulation, whether through downregulation, etc. So now I'm coming more into what some algorithms that we have developed. So essentially now you can see till microRNAs were discovered, till before that, there was this gene regulation which involved genes and transcription factors. Okay, so this was the only part which had attracted the attention of scientists. Now, when microRNA got discovered and it was realized that microRNAs were affecting a further level of gene regulation, then this network, this gene regulatory network, had to also factor in the microRNA part. So when Debarko started working with me, we were looking at transcription factor microRNA gene interaction network, because microRNAs may be targeting some genes which would have created transcription factors. Transcription factors regulate microRNAs because they act like switches. Transcription factors also regulate other genes, and microRNAs through target prediction, through targeting, they target other genes, they target the messenger RNA or produced by certain genes. So there is a complex regulatory network. And I must also warn you that this is not the entire picture. There are other molecules, for example, things called methylation, so epigenetic regulation, and many other things which have to be factored into this complex system, into this complex network, to be able to understand what is happening. These are only three categories of molecules that we are looking at. There are many more which in totality will finally determine how the system will behave. And that is where the systems biology approach comes in. Computational systems biology and other areas work is going on at very fast pace. And we have only understood the tip of the iceberg, I must say, because biology is a very complex system, primarily because it is not just a sum of its parts. You understand transcription factor, you understand genes, and you understand microRNAs in isolation, and therefore you will be able to predict what will happen when they come together. That is not how biology works. Biology is more than the sum of its parts, right? So you know how this will behave, this will behave, this will behave in isolation, but when they come together, they have a totally different fourth type of behavior. So that is where the complexity comes in. But I must also say that we have understood quite a bit. Otherwise, we take medicines and diseases do get cured. It means we have understood quite a bit of what is happening, but much is still left to be done. And also because nature is constantly evolving. Today, whatever we have understood may not be true tomorrow. That, for example, Professor Raghav just now mentioned about drug resistance. You design a drug which targets certain bacteria, certain viruses. By targeting certain bacteria, it does not mean it, primarily what happens is certain proteins of the bacteria, certain proteins which are important for the bacteria to live or the virus to live, those proteins are targeted by drug molecules. But then because nature is so intelligent and because nature is constantly evolving, the bacteria or the virus will modify itself, will have a small mutation, will have a small change, and will modify itself. And therefore the earlier, whatever molecules you had designed to target a particular protein, this particular protein has changed its structure a little bit. And this molecule, small molecule, which you had so painstakingly designed, is ineffective. It is not effective any longer. So even the research therefore continues, and you have to keep on discovering, first of all, more biology and more computer science, more statistics, more mathematics. Finer models will be required to be able to constantly attack this problem. So what we did, some algorithmic parts now, you see, to understand who are controlling or which are the switches which are controlling the expression of microRNAs. We have to understand from where in the gene, in the long strand of DNA, from the microRNA gene, which are the proteins which are acting as switches for switching on the microRNA gene. That is what we have to understand. And to understand that, we have to look at certain portions upstream that is before the microRNA gene, from where the transcription will start. You remember, gene through transcription will produce the RNA. Even microRNA, for microRNA production, there is a gene in front of which there is a transcription. So there is something called the transcription start site, which is upstream of the microRNA gene, from where the transcription starts and the microRNA gets produced. Okay, so it is important to understand from where the transcription starts. Now that is called TSS, transcription start site. Now we had methods. We know methods which are there for predicting the transcription start sites of normal protein coding genes. We use those to predict the transcription start sites of microRNA genes. You know, these genes which will produce microRNAs. We know some genes which produce microRNAs. And we found that the performance of those transcription start site prediction methods, which worked fine for protein coding genes, did not work well for microRNA coding genes. Okay, and therefore we realized that that is not going to work. We have to actually develop methods, or maybe use the same method but train it with microRNA data. And that is what we did. We also extracted interesting features from, you know, the upstream region of microRNAs, and used SVM classifier. We also used our own method of selecting features. You see, when you have a data set, you have certain features also. For every entity, let's say for every microRNA, you will have certain features, a number of features, maybe 100 features corresponding to its upstream region. So we select a region which is upstream of the microRNA, let's say 500 kb upstream of the microRNA, and extract features from there. And many, many features can be extracted. As you can see, some genetic features, CpG island-based features, methylation-based features, etc. Now, the point is, for the classification problem, classification of whether this is a transcription start site within that region of genetic information or not, that classification problem may not require all these features. There may be some features which are absolutely unimportant, maybe some features which have a lot of noise, which should be eliminated. Only some features may be important for the problem, and therefore we need something called feature selection. And we had our own method, which we used, and we had very nice results. For example, we were able to test our method with validated information, which is already there. And we found that this 8 characters, we were only wrong by 8 bases, which is very good actually. In other cases, we were wrong by about 50 bases or so, but these are all very good results with respect to the very long strand of DNA that we were anyway looking at. So this was published some time back. This was this was a work of prediction of transcription start site. And once we knew which were the transcription start site, now what we were able to also do is to figure out which were the transcription factors which could bind to those transcription areas around the transcription start site. And thereby we were able to predict the transcription factors for certain microRNA genes. And this gives that here you will find microRNAs, and here you will find the transcription factors. And we were able to identify the transcription factors responsible for switching on or switching off certain microRNAs. So this was an interesting work. Next, we went into the work of microRNA target prediction. And there were many traditional algorithms which were available. But what we found was these algorithms had widely varying results. Okay, there was no match. Even the machine learning based algorithms which had been developed, there was no match. Essentially, what the problem was, you can look at it as a classification approach. You had several, let's say, validated data sets. So this microRNA was known to target this mRNA as a target. This was known not to target, etc. So we knew this was the training data. We knew this pair is a target, this pair is a non-target, this is a target, non-target, non-target, etc. Now we have a new pair of microRNA and mRNA. And what we want to do is to predict whether this microRNA will target this messenger RNA or not. So this is a classification, a binary classification problem, right? Now what we realized is that most of the methods which were developed till that time, the fact of the matter was that only very few negative data, meaning non-target data, was available, because scientists mostly reported when they succeeded in finding a target. But when they failed, that is, they tried some microRNA with some mRNA and found that it was not targeting, they did not report that. And for us, that was an important data, because when you design a classifier, while you need a strong set of positive data, you also need a strong set of negative data. If you have bad data, you will have a bad classifier. It's sort of a junk in, junk out. So the existing methods, what were doing, they were generating negative data artificially. And through artificial generation, what they were doing essentially was this negative data was becoming very different from the positive data. But in reality, there is not much difference between, only fine differences between the negative and the positive data for this particular problem. So when the existing methods, they were, suppose you have two classes, one is a class here and one is a class here, and you make it very different, you can have a very nice boundary anywhere in between. But when you go into the real testing of that classifier, when the data is actually very overlapping, then the boundary that you have found does not work. So this is called, low generalization capability of the classifier, meaning it works well for training data, but when applied to test data, it does not work well. Its generalization capability, most of the methods which are available were low. So what we focused on was not on the method of classification. We focused on the generation of negative data. And I don't think I have too much time to go into the details of this, but I can only tell you that what we did was we took positive predicted targets from several existing methods. So we took microRNA, mRNA pairs, which were predicted as actual targets, predicted but not validated, but predicted to be targets using some existing methods. We used Miranda was a method, good method, target scan, a good method, and PICTAR to predict targets. And we took those predicted targets and then tried to remove anything from those predicted targets which had a chance of being positive, true targets. Anything that even had a remote chance of being a true target, we removed. And finally, we were left with a core set of data, which we believed to be very highly confident to be negative data. And because they were taken from predicted positives, so they also, we hoped, would come from that overlapping part, because they had positive-like properties. That is why existing methods predicted them to be positive. Yet biological experiments, different, for more than, I think we had 4 levels of filtering. They filtered out anything which had a remote chance of being a true positive. And finally, we were left with a small set of data, which we believed to be true negative. To a large extent, we were confident. And we ran our algorithm using this data. Same algorithm, we used SVM for classification, nothing great about that. And we really found very good results. In fact, this will give you a result. We compared it with almost all the techniques which were available at that point of time. And you see, we are plotting false positive, true positive versus false positive. So what do we want? A classifier to be behaving here, to be functioning here, because then it would have high true positive rate and low false positive rate. Anything here has high true positive, but also high false positive. Anything here has very low false positive, but also very low true positive. What we want is something here. And in fact, target minor, we found the results were lying here in this quadrant. Target scan was also good. It was also performing here, while the other methods either were too conservative or were too ambitious, but either predicting everything as positive or predicting nothing as positive. So at 2 different extreme ends. So this was a good method. And this method was actually picked up by a lot of people around the world. The paper also got very high citations. So, and in fact, the student who developed that also got his first break as postdoc position because of the work that he had done. And this, we continued with this work, and this was primarily done with Debarko, who developed the transcription factor microRNA gene regulatory network using different predicted as well as validated information. So this network was built using predicted information, but predicted only those information we took which had high confidence associated with them, and also validated, of course. So using this, a network was developed, and this network was then analyzed using a method which is called BFS method. Using this method, what we found quite strikingly was there was a 3-level of hierarchy coming up. And at the topmost level, so we were analyzing some cancer specific data. And this particular result is shown on breast cancer specific network. And we found that there seemed to be a small set of molecules. And for this breast cancer specific network, it turned out to be all microRNAs, which seemed to be controlling a larger set of other molecules, which could be transcription factors, other genes, and microRNAs as well. And at the lower level, still larger set, but only these 3 levels. That was quite a striking feature that we observed, not only in breast cancer specific network, but also in colon cancer. And since at the top level, we had just about 5 microRNAs here, we were really interested to find out if these microRNAs indeed had a great role to play in breast cancer, because our computational analysis seemed to indicate that these could be important markers in breast cancer, could be important players in breast cancer in this particular disease. And what we found indeed was true, that microRNA, you see here, microRNA 210, 149, 202, 10B, 155, etc. So 210, 149, and 10B, these, the literature showed, because we do not have that expertise, at least not at that point of time. I don't even have it right now also, that infrastructure where we can actually do the biological experiments ourselves. So we had to rely on the literature, on what the literature said, and it actually yielded that 210, 149, 10B were all known to be onco-MIRs. They had roles in tumor, causing tumors, in causing metastasis. But there were 2 molecules about which not much information was known at that time when we published these papers, 155 and 202. In fact, later on, about a year later, we found another group had independently validated microRNA 155 as important in breast cancer, not through our collaboration, but independently they had done it. So this was an interesting independent validation we also got. Similar results we obtained for colorectal cancer with similar methods. And at the top level, now we found 3 microRNAs and 2 transcription factors, 2 genes, which were there. Of these 3 microRNAs, again, 2 had had literature support that they were involved in colorectal cancer, but 1 did not have. So it was important that these novel information about which literature does not say that people have already looked. So are these novel discoveries? Because then after we have done this computational study, it is for the biologists, we publish these results and the biologists then take it up and have to do the actual wet experiments, have to do the actual laboratory experiments to validate, okay? So if the question might be, if it is anyway validated in the laboratory, it has to be validated, then what is it that we are doing computationally? If this turns out to be a false positive, if this turns out that it has no involvement in colorectal cancer, for example, then what is the importance of the work that we are doing? Well, the possibilities, the choices to the biologist is huge. And every experiment takes time, takes money, takes effort. Now, among these huge, humongous level of possibilities, it is important for the computer scientists, for the mathematicians, for the statisticians to actually develop stronger and stronger methods and give the biologist a handle that test this first before you test anything else, because computationally I can see promise here, But as I said, biology is not computer science. Computer science, we know what is going to happen if we have this statement followed by this statement. But in biology, this molecule followed by this molecule, independently, we cannot understand. I mean, even if we understand those independently, in conjunction, how they will behave, we don't know. So although computationally, I may be interested in this molecule, biologically, what has happened, what I can say is this seems to be interesting, please look it up. And the biologists often, these days, it is impossible for a biologist to work without a computational person, a statistical modeling person, a mathematical modeling person in the group. That is because the important computational information which comes out. So we found that microRNAs, without microRNAs, these in the diseases, in different diseases, the gene regulatory network was very sparse. The controlling, the network control which was going on was very sparse. But when we plugged in the microRNAs, we found that no, these are not sparse networks. Actually, there's quite a heavy amount of interconnection, which is expected, because if this is a disease, things are going wrong because of certain things happening in these molecules, then they should have a lot of interaction with each other. And we realized that these interactions were appearing through microRNAs. So microRNAs were playing very critical, but at a final level, fine-tuning. When they are behaving properly, they are maintaining, they are helping to maintain the balance between the different molecules inside the cell, and therefore sort of keeping the cell healthy. And when they start misbehaving, then these microRNAs become involved in a lot of diseases. So these are important molecules to look at, to study. With that, I'll mention some other important, interesting work which has been happening in my laboratory. I must say that once I took charge as the director, a lot of my research time has been diverted to administration time, but I continue working simply because I have good students who help me or who continue their work, and through our interactions, I continue doing some amount of research. So we have interesting algorithms for clustering as well as bi-clustering and multi-objective clustering. We have interesting results. We have, you see, when we measure distances between 2 points, for example, then we often take Euclidean distance, right? 2 points geographically, we take Euclidean distance. But when we have time series, okay, when things are changing over time, let's say, if you think of gene expression, it changes over time. You think of even the stock prices, every day it is changing over time. When we want to measure distances between two such time series, the Euclidean distance is found not to work well there. It also doesn't make sense. But what works well here are measures which take the pattern, the up and down pattern into consideration. So if two time series share the similar pattern of going up and down, then they are probably closer to each other. We came up with a measure of such a distance also to measure co-expression between genes which are varying, whose expressions are varying over time. We have algorithms for very interesting and fast algorithms for doing sequence alignment. And in recent times, we have algorithms also for doing alignment of small reads, because now with next-gen sequencing and other more sophisticated technologies becoming available, the read lengths have become smaller. And therefore, the task now is we have the reference genome of some organisms, and we have to match or map these small reads to different areas of this reference genome. We have a very interesting algorithm, in fact, a number of algorithms for mapping from smaller reads to the reference genome, which is very robust. This work, DropClast, was done with DeBarco, which is clustering single-cell RNA-seq data, and several other. I must also mention this microRNA secondary regulations. As we have seen, microRNAs directly regulate or directly target some messenger RNA, some gene. But if this gene happens to be a transcription factor which is controlling another microRNA, suppose, then we can say that this microRNA at a secondary level is also controlling other microRNAs. And in fact, this was an interesting and almost a pioneering discovery of the work which DeBarco did with me. And it is because of this, it was one of the first times that we proposed that microRNAs at the secondary level control other microRNAs also, and for which I was invited to a workshop in Germany, everything paid, because we were almost pioneers in stating that microRNAs actually regulate other microRNAs also at a secondary level. These regulations become apparent just a little bit later in time. And you must have also heard about the rational drug design problem, which we have used where we have used multi-objective optimization. These are some of the papers, general references, and I have also references of ours, which with all my students and collaborators, we have a series of works. And I must thank, of course, my institute, which has nurtured me, all my teachers, and DST, DBT, SERB, who have funded a lot of research, the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation, who have also funded a part of one of the works that I explained here, as well as ICTP in Italy. And of course, I remain grateful to all my students and collaborators. Without him, nothing of this sort could have been possible. So thank you very much. If there are any questions or comments, I would be happy to take them.
Yeah, I think there are a couple of questions, ma'am, which I'll just read out for you to answer. Why microRNA is called endogenous RNA? That's the first question.
And okay, I'll just try to stop share. Yeah. So microRNA is endogenous. What is the word endo means? Endo means inside. Okay. Exo means outside. Endo means inside. So endogenous means it is inside the cell. This microRNA is getting produced inside the nucleus, and then it moves out of the nucleus. But it is not something which is coming from outside the cell. It is being created inside. So that is why it is called endogenous. Anything which comes into the cell from outside would be exogenous in nature. I hope that answers the question. Yeah.
The second question is there any therapeutic molecule that is approved by FDA or in advanced clinical stage? I think the question is not complete, Kumar. I think you meant that targets microRNA or something like that.
Yeah, should be targeting microRNAs. You see, microRNAs are very small molecules. Okay, they are very small molecules. Most of the FDA approved drugs, they target 99%. I think would target what should I say? Proteins, right? In fact, I was just looking up. If you look up the druggable proteome, okay, the Human Protein Atlas, it is called the druggable proteome. It says, I will just read out. It says that the current FDA approved drugs are directed to 754 separate human proteins that are directly related to the mechanism of action for the drug. Anyhow, so most of them, very, very large percentage, actually, they target proteins, because proteins are slightly bigger molecules and they have a 3D structure where there will be clefts and cavities, and there you can fit in small molecules. MicroRNAs, I would not really be able to tell you whether there's such drugs already in the markets, but the way in which microRNAs are trying to be targeted is by having, through some carriers, other small genetic materials which will come and bind to the because microRNA is very small, just 21 to 23 nucleotides long. But if we have a complementary strand coming in through carriers, okay, something which will carry that small strand of RNA molecule, which is complementary to a strand of microRNA, and that microRNA is causing all the trouble, then it will come and sit with this microRNA. It will bind because of electrostatic and other interactions, and thereby repressing the microRNA action itself. But whether it is already FDA approved, because these are research topics, I am not sure. I cannot say. My source would be the same as yours, which would be internet. But if anybody else, Debarko, if you have any additional information on that, you may just come in there.
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't particularly, because I don't work on microRNA anymore these days. But as I was speaking to Ramakrishna, one of Madam's early students, so he just informed that there are a lot of drugs these days getting approvals from FDA. I'm sure there will be at least a dozen different drugs, got approval in cancer, that targets microRNA. So for sure there are. So ma'am, I don't think there's any other question. Guys, is there any other question? Then just let me know. Please suggest me information
Sir,
about
there
best
is no one question, but Professor Ujjwal Malik has raised hand.
Professor Malik raised hand. Okay. Ujjwal sir, is there any...
Just I want to mention one of our recent paper. Now there is a very interesting phenomenon. It's called protein moonlighting, where same protein can function in multiple ways. So it's a very new phenomena. We just published a paper in BMC, and there we mentioned sometimes it might be important to target the TFs also. So because targeting protein might be difficult in that case. So this is a new proposal. So maybe, you can think about that. Targeting the TFs also is a good way.
I think there is one more question. I'll just read it out for Professor Bandyopadhyay to answer, which is how can we use this concept of multi-objective algorithm to work against antibiotic resistance? Can we modify existing drugs towards that?
Sir?
So that's an interesting question. Yeah.
Sir, there is the question from the previous talk. This question.
Oh, I see. Okay, got it. Ma'am, just one question I had before I could conclude this session, which is I saw work by Professor Arnold. The lady actually conducted a series of experiments and published some prolific works in different very big journals on protein engineering and how multi-objective optimization and all can be used in protein engineering. So I know you work on multi-objective optimization. So what looks like she uses a biological system, experimental system to validate and evolve the predictions, right? So I always wonder whether the multi-objective optimization kind of a thing can be used in experimental setting, right, to optimize the leads real time, right? So what is your thought about that? It's just a hypothetical question.
Certainly, yes. You see, in many, what should I say? I'm sure in Professor Maulik's lecture, you had you got this flavor of how you can actually compute the fitness function. You see, multi-objective optimization would mean that you essentially you would have.
So here I have a small snapshot.
I think there is a echo because of somebody's mic is open. So let me.
Yeah, no,
yeah,
it is done. So you must have already got this flavor of how you can compute the objective functions. So what happens in multi-objective optimization, essentially, if you are doing this, you need to compute the objectives, right? You need to have formulas by which you can compute the objectives. If you cannot compute the objectives, you cannot run your multi-objective optimization, right? Now, the point is, in many real-life systems, you may not have those formula. You may not be knowing those formula, right? So to compute the objectives, in that case, what do? In that case, your only option is, because you see, multi-objective optimization will give you a potential solution or a number of potential solutions, but then you have to be able to compute their objective values, whether they are good or bad on those multiple objectives, and then run your algorithm. So if you do not know the formulae for computing these objectives, then the best that you can do is actually implement that suggested solution and measure the objectives. Did you get it? So only then, suppose you say that this is going to target, this small molecule will target this protein, but you don't know because you don't know the objectives, then you actually do that experiment. So that is what maybe that lady is doing, actually doing that experiment, measuring certain things from there and feeding it back to the algorithm. Okay.
Correct. She is actually implementing the fitness function in a real system rather than
real system. Exactly. That's what I said. Because whatever model you follow to compute those to compute those objective functions, those are only models. Those are not real systems. So the real value will actually come in, correct value will actually come in from a real system. So this is actually the algorithm and the real system working in tandem. But to warn you, that is going to be very slow. and very expensive unless your algorithm is very sophisticated, because you cannot simply run the real experiments millions of times.
Exactly. Yeah.
So therefore, your algorithm has to be very sophisticated so that very quickly it can give you a good solution. Okay.
Right,
So
right. I think Professor Frances Arnold is the complete name. She got 2018 Nobel Prize for using this kind of approaches computationally, but again, measuring the fitness in a real system rather than, and of course, doing it much more cleverly than what we can afford in a computer. So yeah, so that's a very exciting direction, perhaps. Okay, ma'am, I think there's no other questions, so we are good to conclude here. Thanks a lot for the wonderful talk and
thank you.
Yeah, inspiring us. Thanks, ma'am.